The software we're going to look at today is a chart check automation. However, it's one that's focused more on stamp checks. What are stamp checks? Stamp checks are checks having to do with approvals, sign-offs, handoffs, timestamps, really the kind of checks that one thinks of when one thinks of weekly chart checks or final chart checks, although they do appear as part of initial chart checks as well. Now, usually I'm focused more on automating checks having to do with the plan itself rather than stamps related to the plan. So this really was my first time creating a software specifically like this. So not a single line of code was copied and pasted. It was all created from scratch. Furthermore, this is software that I created for my own use, specifically for a locum assignment that was 6 weeks long. So it didn't really make sense for me to work on this for 1 month, only to use it in the last 2 weeks. I had to cram the entire creation process into 1 weekend. And as I already mentioned, this was created from scratch. So for those reasons, this is software that, as you'll see, is by no means finished software. It has typos in the GUI, and then you'll clearly see that this is software that could benefit from further development. Finally, because timestamps and handoffs factor into stamp checks in a big way, it made a lot of sense to create this software in the form of a dashboard. And that is why the software is currently called Dash. So let's get straight to the demo. You double-click the Dash desktop icon to launch it, and then you see that the checks are broken down into 4 panels, one for weeklies, one for finals, and one for initial checks. And there's a 4th panel called Loose Ends. What is this panel about? Now, normally when performing these stamp checks manually, you start out in ARIA with a large work list that is the list of all patients treated in the past 2 weeks. And then you filter this work list down to a more practical size by clicking the Show QA Eligible checkbox, and then go through this shorter list of patients. But by doing so, you would be unable to perform certain checks that would only be caught if you were going through the original larger work list. So that is what the Loose Ends panel is all about. Automating those checks that cannot be performed by manually going through the shorter work list. The first line in this panel reads, treatment approved plans treated in past 2 weeks were last treated less than 5 days ago, which expresses the condition that would apply if the test passes, which is why it's in red. The line below it specifies the patient for which this test failed. If I open this patient up in ARIA and go to the Summary tab in Chart QA, I would see that the last treatment was in fact more than 5 days ago as of the time of this recording. And if we go to the Journal tab, we see that somebody left a note saying that the patient decided to discontinue treatment. At this point, I will pause the video. I will go to Quick Links, Treatment Management, Plan Scheduling, and delete any scheduled fractions that haven't been treated. Then go to Plan Parameters back in Treatment Management and set the plan status to Completed Early. And then return back to Dash and refresh to see that the check now passes. All right, let's look now at the weekly panel. We see that there's 1 patient listed there. The entries in red meaning something has not passed. If we highlight this patient, we see the checks listed that have been performed, green indicating that the check has passed, and red indicating that it failed. The first line in the checks panel is physics approved physics chart checks. So this is looking at all the physics chart check documents in ARIA and checking that they're approved, and also checking that the person who approved them is a physicist. So the software allows you to configure which ARIA user is a physicist versus an MD. Second check is that the patient has at least 1 previous chart check. So this patient has been binned by the software as a weekly, therefore you would naturally expect there to be at least 1 chart check already corresponding to the initial chart check. The third check is self-explanatory. It's just checking that all the prescriptions in ARIA for this patient have been approved. Fourth check MD approved plan QA MU check documents. So if you remember, when you upload a document into ARIA, there's a pull-down menu that allows you to designate the document type. And for the purposes of this check, the software is looking for documents that have been designated as a plan document, in this case meaning a printout from Eclipse, a QA measurement, or MU check documents. And it's checking that all those documents that have been uploaded that are of those types have been approved, and the person who approved them was an MD. And the last check we see here, which actually failed because we see it in red, it's checking that between the last Physics Weekly chart check and yesterday, all the days between those 2 points, if there were treatments on those days, it's checking that images were taken and approved or reviewed on those days. It failed, so at this point what I would do is I would go into offline image review in ARIA, which I did, and I saw that there actually weren't any images at all for this patient. And when I went into chart QA, I saw that basically the reason for that is it's an electron patient. So you wouldn't expect there to be images for this patient. Now, as mentioned earlier, this is software that hasn't really been developed. Had I had a chance to further develop it, I would have put in a rule in the logic that says, because when the patient is an electron patient, don't bother performing this check. So at this point, what I'll do is I'll pause the video. I will go into ARIA. I will add in a chart check entry and document, approve it, and then come back and hit refresh to see that it clears. The final check automation is very similar to the weekly chart check automation, so I won't repeat myself. But you can see here that there's a red entry reminding me to create a chart check entry in ARIA corresponding to the final chart check itself. So I'm going to pause the video here, go do that, then come back to Dash Software, hit refresh, and now I see that the earlier red entry has turned green, and there's a new red entry now reminding me to go to Plan Parameters and set the plan status to complete. So I'll pause the video, go do that, come back to Dash Software, hit refresh again, and now I see that the finals panel has cleared. While working on this final chart check, a new entry has appeared in the weekly panel. If we click on it, we see Dash Software complaining about an unapproved document. If we go to the document section in ARIA for this patient, we see that the planner uploaded a composite plan that the MD had probably asked for. So this is just Dash Software prompting me to write an email reminder to the MD asking him to approve the plan. Let's now shift our attention to the initial chart check panel and click on the first patient in that panel. We see that Dash Software has already checked that the prescription has been approved and is reminding us to check that 2 documents have been uploaded and assigned to the MD for approval in ARIA. Dash automatically recognized this as a 3D plan, it's a breast plan, and is therefore not asking us to do the same for a QA measurement document, which it would if this were an IMRT or a VMAT or an SBRT. At this point, I have to pause the video and go into ARIA and review the plan document, basically perform a manual plan check, which is a huge blow to my reputation because I'm all about automation, and here I am doing manual checks. The problem is that although I have software that automates plan checks, and I have a YouTube video on that software, and I'll link to it in this video, I'm only here for 6 weeks and I only have time to set up one of these softwares, a stamp check automation or a plan check automation, and I decided to go with the stamp check automation. If satisfied with the results of that manual check, I will assign the plan to the MD in ARIA, and then come back to Dash Software and hit refresh and hopefully see one of those entries, specifically the one for the plan document, turn green. Afterwards, I will create the MU check document in SunCheck, upload it into ARIA, assign it to the MD for approval, come back again to Dash software, hit refresh, and hopefully see the second of these document entries in Dash turn green. Now, once all these checks that we've been talking about have cleared, Dash software will add a new check for the MD to approve these documents that we've just assigned to him in ARIA. Once he or she has done so, Dash software will then add a new check for me, the physicist, and I'm the only solo physicist here, to treatment approve the plan so that they can treat the patient, meaning to set the plan status in ARIA to treatment approved so that they can treat the patient. Now, at this facility that I'm in, the therapists like to minimize the amount of time between the point at which the MD has approved the documents and the point where they click beam on the treatment console. They like to shrink that down as much as possible. And so if I'm out there getting coffee while the MD has already approved the documents and they're setting up the patient on the table and they call me and I'm not there to treatment approve the plan so that they can treat the patient, then I'm in trouble. So these two checks, and you're seeing one of them here, added by Dash software saved the day for me, because now I can calculate, I can say, right before I leave for coffee, if I look at all these patients in the initial panel and the MD has not approved any of the plans for these patients, then I'll know that if I leave now, I'll be able to come back before they've had a chance to set up the patient and call me to treatment approve.